Every single thing that is effed up about our industry, you can boil back down to a supply-demand mismatch problem.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Healthy Savings. I'm Sasha. I'm your host. I'm the co-founder of Milu Health. We're joined today by Julie Yu, who's a general partner at A16Z. Julie, thank you so much for taking some time to hang out and chat healthcare and AI and data and fun stuff.
All the fun things that I get to talk about every day. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sasha.
Absolutely. So why don't we just start with your background? You've got an awesome background building stuff in healthcare, and I'm sure you've had more than your fair share of stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work, and then into like the investing world. So we'd love to just hear who you are, how you got here.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I focus on healthcare here at Andreessen. And I guess my path to healthcare started as your typical like pre-med flop story. I feel like in our world, a lot of folks like start out pre-med, wanting to go into medicine, and then realize that that's not the exact path that they want to take into the healthcare world, to the disappointment of their parents. But I did start as a pre-med going into college. Switched to computer science, actually. I was in school during the original dot-com boom when everyone was flocking to, the internet and software for the first time. So was a software engineer as the first part of my career outside of healthcare. And I always say that had there been a digital health industry at the time that I graduated, I'm kind of dating myself now, but I probably would have gone into it, to be honest. But there just, at that point, there really wasn't that much opportunity in that world. And so I actually went to work for an enterprise software company writing code. We mainly focused on the retail e-commerce space, and so had a front row seat to that first wave of, large retailers bringing their shops online for the first time, and lots of learnings there that I think are very analogous to what is now happening in healthcare, where, so that puts us at exactly 20 years behind, the retail industry in some ways, but lots of interesting things that have definitely informed my theses for how I see opportunity in this space. But, did that for several years, and then right when the government was starting to talk about what ultimately became the HITECH Act and meaningful use, that's when I decided to make a career change into healthcare. And I did that by way of grad school, knowing that I needed to kind of cut my teeth to build my network in this highly esoteric space. So went into a grad school program focused on healthcare entrepreneurship and did a couple of startups in the healthcare space before starting my own, and traversed, many different subsegments of this large universe that is healthcare. So my first company in healthcare was in the genomic space, and this was right after the completion of the Human Genome Project. So everyone was just imagining all the different use cases around human genetics and how they could apply to research, to clinical, et cetera. So did a company in that domain. Then did a company in the payer space, which ultimately got acquired by CVS, which was by many orders of magnitude the largest company I've ever worked at in my life. And I lasted like a hot second there just because I'm very much a 0 to 1 person, but was, extremely fascinating to be in the belly of the beast of that, CVS is much larger now than it was back then, but even at that point to be in the belly of the beast of such a massive healthcare organization was quite fascinating as well. And then one of the founders of that company that got acquired became my co-founder of Kairos, which I started in 2010. And that was really all about sort of how do we enable patients to get access to the right doctor at the right time and be able to actually book an actionable appointment. So we were sort of going after one of the many holy grail problems in healthcare, which is how do you match patient demand to provider supply. We did it through a enterprise software platform that we sold largely to health systems in the first part of the business, and then now ultimately to both health systems and payers. And so I was the head of product there for what arguably was the best thing I've ever done in my life so far, other than have a baby. But that was an incredible experience, which I'm happy to share more about. And so did that through growth, and sort of woke up one day and realized that my company had scaled to a point where they don't need me anymore, and decided to step down, move out west. I'd been based on the East Coast this entire time, and my initial intention coming out here was actually to start another company. And so this was 2019, was kind of doing my walkabout, trying to find a co-founder, had my little list of all the things I wanted to build or explore building. And then got pinged by the team here at Andreessen Horowitz. And my company, by the way, had been a VC-backed startup. And so I had my own point of view on the venture capital universe, which was not favorable, unfortunately. And so when they first asked, hey, what do you think about being an investor? I was like, hell no, I want to be a builder. I want to be in the arena, so to speak. But I was a huge fan of Andreessen Horowitz, and Ben's book was very much my Bible as during my founder journey. And I said, but this is like intriguing enough that I'm going to take some meetings, figure out what you guys are pitching me, and see what happens from there. Maybe you guys can fund me, and we can go our merry ways. But obviously, fast forward, I very much not only drank the Kool-Aid, but was presented with what I thought was an incredible opportunity to essentially build the VC platform that I wish I had when I was a founder, specific to the healthcare space, specific to the Andreessen Horowitz ethos of, many ex-founders backing founders, bringing a different degree of empathy to how we support those teams, doing it in a way that's very multidisciplinary and kind of can take advantage of the full breadth of expertise and access to world-class companies that we have across all the industries that we invest in, and then build out a post-investment operational team capability to create an unfair advantage for the companies that we invest in. So that's where I sit today, now just under 5 years in, and what I believe is the most remarkable platform that entrepreneurs can partner with. But you can corroborate that, Sasha. If that
I can honestly, like I didn't like when we first met you guys were awesome and deep in the space. But I was like, okay, sure, like the platform, whatever. Like I'm gonna put a big zero in my expectations on like actual help to get. Like we're gonna have to build this thing, and we're either gonna be successful or we're not. And like I want people that I want to spend the next 10 years working with, but I don't believe the platform's actually gonna tangibly help me in the business. And it does. Like it really does. Both personal intros that you guys can make and from like operating partners that you guys bring on, but like candidates and BD conversations, and it's been awesome. So founders, you should talk to Julie and Daisy because they're awesome. Now, how has that changed since you've been there? Like, did you come in and say, okay, great, founder hat, like this is great, but I want to add this to the platform, or has the platform kind of grown and evolved itself, and you haven't needed to come in and do anything different with it?
Yeah, I mean, Andreessen in the past, 4.5 years that I've been here has been one of the fastest growth environments that I've been in as well. Like I joined when we were right around like 100 people. We're now like close to 600, I think. And so as far as venture capital firms go, that's like extremely rare, right? To see, operating platforms like this at that level of scale. So that in and of itself has been a forcing function for us to very much evolve like on a day-to-day basis, how we think about what we're building here. But specific to healthcare, I mean, we historically had been a very centralized model where we had, a single GP group, shared services at the central level across all verticals. But the bio and health team was actually one of the first to be what we call verticalized, where we started to build out our own domain specific capabilities because, as we know, the laws of physics in our universe are extremely different than many others. I mean, all verticals at this point within our firm have kind of their own dedicated motions. But I mean, our universe in particular just requires obviously a different level of domain expertise, completely different relationships, in the ecosystem and on and on and on. And so from day one, the mandate was very much, take what Andreessen Horowitz had already gotten to product market fit with, so to speak, with other industries, consumer, enterprise, fintech, et cetera, and figure out what the right version of that is for healthcare and life sciences. We sit together in one fund. And so that was the mandate. And so we now have what used to be probably 80% similar to the rest of the firm, 20% difference in healthcare is probably now exactly the flip of like 20% is probably comparable to what we do across the firm. And then 80% is like very purpose built for our domain. So examples of that, you mentioned BD. We have an amazing BD team that again would have saved me years of my life had I had access to it when I was building Kairos. But, their sole job is to earn the trust of the key decision makers in the payer, provider, employer, life sciences, et cetera, industries, such that we are their first call when they're thinking about anything related to technology, innovation, AI, such that, at the appropriate times, we can introduce our companies in as potential partners on their mission. We have a policy team based in DC who is very much at the tip of the spear of how do we influence the thinking around how AI is regulated in healthcare and just make sure that there are no unintended consequences that stifle innovation in our space and sort of inadvertently create a disadvantage for startups vis-a-vis other big tech companies in our space. Pretty much at this point, every single one of our functions is quite domain specific with respect to healthcare. And, credit to our founders who are always the ones who are pushing us to, do more to kind of, create that unfair advantage for them in this particular space.
It's funny, the policy and DC piece is huge. Like for me as a early stage founder, like I'm not going to spend a minute thinking about it,
Mm-hmm.
which means I'm not going to spend a minute talking to policymakers, going to DC. Like it won't impact my business today, but it's so important because there will be AI stuff that is shaped now, and it's going to be shaped by people who have lobbying dollars, not nefariously, just like that's how the sausage is made. And like tiny startups are critical to making any of this stuff happen. So the fact that you guys can go out there and aggregate demand and put a voice to it, it's massive.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that was most striking for me as I started to get involved in some of those efforts, well, two things. One is when DC says, oh, we are already engaging tech, their definition of tech is like Google and Microsoft and Apple, which obviously not only are like orders of magnitude more massive than the companies that we think about, they are also not aligned with what startups want and need. And so
Right.
expressly are almost like the antithesis of the viewpoint that we want represented in DC. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference. Silicon Valley is not one monolithic thing. It's, really kind of two different worlds when you think about scale. But then, I mean, second, and more optimistically speaking, I mean, the willingness and desire to have the startup, what we call little tech voice at the table and ensure that, that is being taken into account as these new rules and policies are being made is extremely high. And so we've had nothing but just open arms in terms of folks who want to hear that perspective. And so, we're fortunate that we have the scale of firm and platform here that, we can very much lean into that. We are expressly lobbying. There's actually a great podcast that Ben and Mark just did around our sort of, political approach and our strategy there that folks should listen to get a feel for, why our approach is different and, how much of a long-term orientation we have and commitment we have to this. But it's been great to see the level of desired engagement that DC has with us, as a representation of what's happening in the startup world.
It's kind of crazy. I hadn't really thought much about this until now, but like I would always take the DC and policy stuff and say we're not going to spend any time. It doesn't impact us, and that's still the right answer for us as a small health tech company, small but mighty and growing fast. But the crazy thing is there have been really meaningful policies that have completely shaped our business. Like we connect into EHRs through the Cures Act authorization. If that didn't exist, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. The company would be completely different. Like the fact that we're able to get patients to connect their EHRs and send them a real-time alert based on their real-time health information and help them save money, like we can only do that because there was a law that was passed. Otherwise, all the big EHRs, all the big providers, they would have had no incentive to do any of this stuff. It never would have happened. Same with price transparency, right? And folks like Turquoise who can go and pull that down, and us who look at the data, and employers who are looking at the data, like that was a policy change that happened. So I don't know. There's something. Maybe there's a magical power at work, or some like really good folks pushing health policy somewhere. But like I've seen stuff happen here that I would have never expected in health tech policy that I don't think happens in other industries. So I'm excited about where that could go.
Yeah, no, same here. I mean, we're you have to be careful to thread the needle the right way, but in healthcare in particular, I certainly believe that regulation can be a catalyst to category creation that would otherwise, not be possible if you allowed things to operate as status quo. So there's many examples that we've written about where, entire sub-industries, let alone entire, businesses that ultimately became very, very amazing outcomes, literally would not have existed if those rules and laws had not been put into place.
I'm fascinated in when you wanted to go start a company and you decided, okay, great, I'm going to go invest in a ton of companies instead. What do you think, like if you had played that out and you wouldn't have met the A16Z folks and jumped on board, like what would you have started? Like where would that train have gone?
Well, I mean, the fun part was that I mentioned I had my little list of ideas that I was exploring, and like I basically just flipped those into my investment theses. So my criteria for investing in companies is literally like, number one is a CEO that I would work for. So I don't think I've ever told you this, Sasha, but that's like one thing I always look at.
No, I never.
And then two, is it a type of business or type of product platform in general that I would have wanted to build on my own? And, I think there's different schools of thoughts when you talk to investors about, do you focus on things that you feel you have some kind of like intellectual competitive advantage around, where you feel like you're somewhat of a domain expert and you can understand, in depth, like what the nature of the business is, versus those who are more generalist and are willing to invest in things that they might not understand as much. I definitely skew more the former. And I just, again, just from a pure personal preference perspective, I want to deeply not only know, but like be passionate about the thing that the company is building. And so that's been a guiding principle, is really translating a lot of what I probably would have wanted to build on my own into, channeling those calories into how do I invest. So if you look at my list of investments, I'm, pretty much like at least 70% of them were on that list. And it's always, I would say thematically, every single company that I'd actually done or built prior to this had something to do with how do you solve a fundamental supply-demand mismatch problem in whatever industry I was operating in. So the e-commerce company that I mentioned was doing search as applied to how do you match consumer demand to the right products in your on your online catalog to increase, AOV and conversion rates on your online website. The genetics company was, how do you match patients to the right drugs by way of sophisticated genetic testing and make appropriate interpretation when you have very scarce resources who have that expertise. And then Kairos was all about, matching patient demand to provider appointment supply without compromising quality and financial experience and things like that. So I think if you were to, sort of double click or squint your eyes and look at every single company that I've invested in, there's probably something along that thematic line that underpins the core, business hypothesis for why I think that company needs to exist.
Makes sense. There's supply and demand mismatches in healthcare. Like, no way. It's seamless. It's all API driven. It's great.
Every single thing that is effed up about our industry, you can boil back down to a supply demand mismatch problem.
But we can solve it with a fax machine and a call center. So it's great.
Those are the only tools we had in our toolkit to date. But that's obviously part of the why now excitement, is that, technology enables us to do things that were not possible even a few years ago.
Well, so that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. If you think back to your time as a builder in healthcare, and like the tools that you had access to, the data that you had access to, and the things that you could go do, like the stuff that was in the realm of possibility versus the companies that you look at now, like what's changed, what's new, like what barriers have been broken down that you can go and create something in healthcare that you couldn't before, and also like what hasn't, like what still sucks that like someone's gonna go have to tackle that beast.
Yeah, I mean, so much has changed, and that's one of the reasons why they're like, for me, another reason for the why now for me is like, generally speaking, things that took me years to do as an entrepreneur can now be done in months, sometimes weeks, sometimes days. And that's everything from, just core infrastructure, right? Like we had to roll everything on our own back then. Like it was no EHRs actually had like open APIs back then. And so every single integration that we had to do with an EHR was bespoke. I used to make it describe it akin to like a chisel against like a concrete wall. And, you had to like use the stud detector to figure out whether you were in the right place. And then, so it's very bespoke, very one-off, not scalable at all. You had to, jump through 7 hoops to even get permission to do it. So all of that now, again, like out of the box, Cures Act driven, Fire APIs and, established workflows and kind of just like ways to do it. Data was also, we started at Kairos almost at the worst time in some ways, in that it was right during meaningful use when EHRs were just getting adopted for the first time at enterprise level scale, right? Like when we started Kairos, I think it was less than 50% of doctors were digital in terms of their medical record systems. And so the premise of like liquid data was just not a thing. And so you had to like really beg, borrow, and steal to get any access to information that could inform a product development effort. And so, and even capital, part of why I'm doing what I'm doing now is because I want there to be more sources of capital available to digital health entrepreneurs. And back then I could count on like one hand, like the number of investors who actually had like a tech thesis in healthcare. There were plenty of more traditional healthcare services investors, plenty of life sciences investors, but folks who specifically believed in the ability for technology to make a tangible impact in our space were few and far between. And so, and we raised it from like 4 out of 5 of the ones that existed back then. And so that's very much why my experience was, the power dynamic was very much in favor of the VCs, whereas now I think at least in the early stage markets, it's very much flipped where, folks like you have choice. You have like, so many different flavors of early stage venture capital that you can choose from: generalist, specialist, multi-sector, multi-stage, all these different things, people who have built companies versus not. So I think that's actually been a huge reason why we've seen much more maturity in this space in the last, 5 to 7 years, is just simply the willingness and the ability to fund more, shots on goal with respect to, the types of businesses that can get built.
That last one is interesting because I remember when I was in the early stage investor world, 2012, 2013, like most folks wouldn't touch healthcare. It
Yeah.
was just like, no, like those are going to be
They're a
bad
slog.
businesses. It's going to be a slog. I don't understand it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do payers work? Like, what are you talking about? And I mean, even now, like if I look at it outside looking in, like you can make an argument, hey, in the public markets, like healthcare, digital health hasn't done well. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's all these companies that went public and didn't do great, and some of them are turning around, others aren't. Like this stuff's not going to go anywhere. Like what's everyone talking about? And I don't know. It takes a certain kind of weirdo to say, great, I want to still start a company in this space so we can wear that hat. But it takes another kind to be like, no, we're still going to invest, millions and billions of dollars into digital health companies because we think it will change and it will be massive. And today
Yeah.
it isn't.
Yeah. And I mean, every industry has a version of this, right? Where like maybe the first one or two cycles of VC hype and startups and all that kind of stuff end up not working. And then you have a period of jadedness where, folks lose faith and move on to other spaces. But then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but like over the course of maybe 10 years in the third cycle of evolution, you finally get it right. And you finally see much larger opportunities than you would have imagined. Like, I mean, we always talk about the internet was a version of this, right? If you were in that first cohort, you were burned like shit and might have run through the hills, but gosh, you probably missed out on like the best, set of vintage years ever in the history of venture capital. Enterprise software, same thing, right? Like no one would have imagined that you would have companies worth $100 billion that were providing workflow tools to companies, in the cloud. And so that's kind of what you have to believe in digital health. And I think it's still, a lot of people view that as crazy talk, that, this is actually the moment, right? Like after a few, sort of misses where we did, I mean, admittedly, we had, a couple of cycles where people thought now's the time, like digital health is going to happen now, and those did not pan out. And so there are right now a huge cohort of people who are jaded and moving away. But there's lots of reasons, including the ones that we just talked about. I think the other piece is like the position of the incumbents. I've never seen them be so under siege, to really reinvent themselves. The advent of AI and generative AI is scaring the pants out of them, right? And we always talk about how, even at like, 7 years ago, if you would have said, imagine that the company, the lodging company that has the most global inventory of rooms is a software company called Airbnb, or the largest car manufacturer by market cap is a software tech company called Tesla. Like no one believed anyone back then, right? And laughed you out of the room. But guess what? And so I believe that that's going to happen in healthcare in the next 10 years. And, we just we had to get a couple of cycles out of our system before the primordial soup of conditions, both macro and micro, were such that you could actually take a real shot.
That part is one that we see a lot in our like day-to-day world because we're trying to create something new in the employer healthcare space focused
Mm-hmm.
on cost savings and great quality. But our fundamental belief is we have way more data now and we have AI on top of it. And you could use that if you can find a way to engage members and employees, because without that, you got nothing. But if you could find a way to do that, you can build something that hasn't existed before. And for the first year of Milu, we'd run around with that. And anyone who was around long enough in the employer space would be like, yeah, it's been tried. Like, have you seen
Mm-hmm.
Castlight? Like, that play's been run. It didn't work. And we're like, sure, but like, I don't know. Have you seen Alta Vista? Or like, they're not that's not to throw shade at Castlight. Like they've built an amazing thing and some parts worked and some parts didn't, but it was before its time. Like I'm sure that, and I think I've heard this from that, like to get claims data, like they had to fight a battle every single time at the biggest employers. And now we work with, 50 employee self-funded groups that have their claims data that, under a proper BAA, you can use to go and help people. And like that didn't exist before. There's no data on doctor quality. Now there's 6 different vendors out there who have really good metrics on complication rates and mortality rates and volumes of procedures. And like, we can actually go build a mousetrap that gets it out to employees and employers. It just wasn't possible before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the data flow piece would be yet another reason why the why now dynamic is even more extreme now, today versus what it was several years ago. I mean, you mentioned claims data. Like, claims data was the end all be all, and it was like gold. Back in my day, we grew up at the same time as Castlight, and it was like you said, like, it was, you had to squeeze water out of a rock, and then when you got it, like, it was, you were like, you had accolades from the entire industry for having done it. Whereas today, it's like, it's a much more liquid form of data. It's much more commoditized, and it has limits, right? Like, I mean, claims data, we tried to contort it to do many things and inform many things that it was definitely not designed to do. And so I think the exciting, future wave here is, how do you take not only claims data, which is really more of a financial, transactional representation of what occurred, combine that with EHR data, as you guys are doing, to get the clinical story, and even EHR data. It's highly sporadic, right? And, a CCD is a very limited, set of information relative to the broader unstructured notes and chart that you could also obtain, imaging data, lab data, patient reported data. There's all these novel streams of data. When we look at our digital health portfolio, we actually have companies that have, like, they had to hack the FHIR standard to make it work for their longitudinal data streams, because, like, the entirety of the FHIR standard was designed on the premise of, like, highly sporadic facility-based encounters that happen, like, one and done, versus this notion of just continuous streams of data. And so I think we're going to see the next wave of kind of transformative work being done, both at the infrastructure layer. There's a lot of companies that are building actual infrastructure to make those things possible, but also just in terms of the use of data and what data companies will ask for, right? Like, now in the age of AI, what's kind of amazing to see is, like, everyone, like, obviously like, oh, this is the time that we can finally use all of the digitized data assets that we have. But guess what? Like, that data was not optimized for, what generative AI and AI models, really need to be able to inform intelligent decisions about patient journeys. And so I think right now we do see a wave of efforts to just curate the data, like, just curating the data alone, such that it is optimized for the eating by model, like training data, is in and of itself, like, years of effort that is going to have to be had across the industry, let alone then what you could do with it. So I think we're going to, claims was kind of like wave one. Now that's great because it's sort of standardized, commoditized, relatively ubiquitous. And then, we're going to see these kind of next future waves, I think, largely driven by the appetite for AI.
It's huge though. I wasn't sure if this, like, when we first started playing around with, hey, when you use the Cures Act authorization and I as a patient connect my EHR, like, what comes through? Mm-hmm. We were, hacking it together for the first time and looking at it. I assumed that there would be no progress notes and radiology reports. Like, just someone somewhere would have been like, no, we're just going to put the structured stuff in, and it would suck. And that wasn't the case. And like, we get, like, when you connect your EHR, like, all the notes come through, and that's huge, right? Because like, you get and it can be 1,000 pages and, like, hard to parse through, but that's where AI comes in. But like, mm-hmm. the foundation is there, which is super exciting. Where do you see the AI train going? Like, you've got the front row seat to see how your companies are using it, but also what's coming next. Like, where are there applications that you're seeing that folks aren't thinking about today, and of the ones that folks are thinking and talking about, like, what gets you most excited?
Yeah, no, I mean, we fundamentally believe that AI will be transformative, specifically in healthcare. We've been investing against that thesis really since day one. Credit to my partner Vijay, who was kind of the founder of our Bio and Health platform, and we have a number of companies that pre-Gen AI, but we're using very cutting edge AI techniques to develop, point of care systems like Bayesian Health and revenue cycle automation systems like Akasa. So we have a number of great examples already that are out there working, getting adopted at the front lines of healthcare. And then, I think in the same way that to quote Mark Andreessen, like software ate the world, right? So as we mentioned earlier, all these industries that historically had been extremely traditional, offline, manual, are now entirely transformed by healthcare. When you look at the top companies by market cap, by industry, what used to be like maybe one company that was a software business, now it's like 7 out of 10 of those companies are software businesses. The same thing is happening with AI, but much faster than the software wave occurred, right? That software transition happened over the course of arguably, let's call it 15, maybe even 20 years. If you look at, I ran the analysis of like, okay, if you look at the top 10 companies by market cap in 2022 versus 2024, in that short period of time, it's like Nvidia's up there, and then of course, like all the Magnificent Seven have like recapitulated themselves as an AI company, right? So I think that's going to happen in healthcare for sure. Number two, I think we are not yet at the point where we have what I would call like specialist large language models. So everyone's, all the hype is around GPT and Bard and Gemini and all these kinds of things, but that are very, generalist models, obviously trained on the internet. As we know, like the vast majority of highly valuable, actionable data in our world is below sea level in proprietary data stores that are not indexed by the web. And so, we're starting to see the advent of specialist LLM companies that where the data sets and the way that the models are trained are purpose built for our industry. And it's even distinct between like healthcare and life sciences. Like we're seeing companies that are just focused on the bio, kind of life sciences part of that world versus the care delivery end of the stick. The most interesting thing that I'm kind of curious to see what will happen is around business model. Like right now, my coaching to any entrepreneur who's building an AI company is like, don't try to reinvent the wheel on business model. Just figure out a way to package your product in such a way that you can kind of ride existing reimbursement rails, whether as a software product or, go down the FDA path, get approved as a diagnostic, a software-based diagnostic, get reimbursed for that, whatever it is. But I wonder, and we're already starting to hear some conversations from especially provider groups that say, okay, actually the way that I want to deploy this AI is as an augmentation to my staff. And I don't want to go, lobby my IT team for, tech budget necessarily to do that. I want like an autonomous call center agent. I want an autonomous billing agent, whatever it is. Could I just pay for this as an FTE on my staff? And, you can imagine a world in which soon we're going to be hiring literally AI staff as if we were hiring an FTE. You can actually interview them. They'll talk to you. They'll answer questions, right? And you can train them, so to speak, to be aligned with your, culture and norms and guidelines. So, I think that's another sort of finger on the pulse that we see happening sometime in the next few years is really a shift in how we even think about purchasing some of these products and technologies.
That's fascinating. I haven't heard that. It's not our space, so we haven't asked around. But like the fact that it comes out of an FTE budget is wild. I have a founder friend who's working on a sales rep as an AI, and it's the same thing. Like, hey, you can hire an SDR and we'll train an AI based on your data to do stuff for you. Yeah. But I had never thought about it. Yeah.
The AI will negotiate a quota. You have to pay a commission. Who knows? We laugh at it now, but this is like the kind of thing where people find it to be silly at the beginning, and then fast forward, it might just be status quo.
That's crazy. And as you think about that in healthcare, is it operational and administrative first, light clinical second, deep clinical last, or is there an argument that like I was texting with a friend who's a patient who's got a chronic condition, one of those like fly around the country, see 10 different specialists, still deal with it every day and like don't have a good answer. And he was like, hey, has anyone built an LLM for me? Like I need that, which is as deep clinical as you can get. But I don't know, an LLM could be better than most doctors who don't focus on that crazy stuff and haven't spent a decade doing that research.
Yeah. We actually published a piece with like sort of your standard 2x2 of, you've got internal B2B facing use cases versus external B2C, and then clinical versus administrative. And certainly, if you were to cluster like all the activity that we see out there in the universe, it's highly biased, right now towards administrative internal facing, where and typically deployed more as like a co-pilot type thing. But, that's definitely where people view the lowest risk, profile, so that you can take some risky shots on goal, but the kind of consequences of getting it wrong are lower than if you were putting it in front of doctors at the point of care. But that, I would say, the co-pilot form of that is absolutely where we see activity happening. Some of that's just the risk appetite of the provider group themselves on adopting such a thing. And then, in some ways, like the holy grail is what you just described, which is a patient consumer facing autonomous LLM type approach, which is probably the sparsest quadrant in that graph today. But, we invested in Hippocratic AI, which is going after this. And there are, a lot of companies that have a ambition to build effectively what they call an AI doctor, which again falls into that basket of things that Vinod Khosla got laughed out of the room 5 years ago for saying, but we now are kind of getting to a point where we should definitely in our lifetime, if not sooner, see some form of that. So but that obviously opens up a whole Pandora's box about regulation and how do you put guardrails around this stuff, which it's that's also another fascinating thing to see. How enterprises are navigating that conversation around things like bias and safety, where it's actually what it's actually resulting in is not the development of necessarily like AI specific standards, but it's causing people to realize, like, guys, like, we don't even have those guidelines for our human workers,
Right.
And so let's develop that first so that we can even grade our employees on what we think the gold standard is. And then just apply that same lens to the AI. Like, why would we have two different standards? So yeah, lots of, sort of philosophically and ethically interesting, debates like that are happening all over the country.
I've got like 5 different things going on in my head from all that. One is I've seen in past lives, like in medicine, people talk about clinical standards and SOPs, and it's critical. You can't have a hospital run or a practice run without it. But on the other hand, like when you look at the data and you see the stuff that happens in the real world, like it's not following a standard. Like It's people making decisions. And if you can enhance that in some way with data, it's absolutely huge. For us, we're doing the first quadrant. Like we're investing real energy into, hey, can we read an EHR combined with claims data and see, is there something that we can do to help this person? And we do it manually. We do it with rules today. And the next piece is with AI. But that's the safe stuff. And I think that's the world we'll always be in. And it can be absolutely monumental. But like, oh my God, if somebody someday could create a thing. I saw like a Twitter thread maybe a day or two ago around pediatric cancer and functional assays and like being able to test cancer cells in a lab and figure out, like, is there an off-label chemo that could help this 3-year-old patient that nobody's ever thought about? And like, man, if you could have a thing where somebody could look up, here's what my kid has that's rare, and it spits out the standard of care and it spits out the crazy stuff. And then it says, by the way, there's a way to get an AI-supported functional assay where you go to a lab and they test cells with a variety of drugs. They pick the drugs based on data that's out there, and then there's a result that's read by a doctor or a pathologist. Like, I would love for somebody to build that someday.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing too, like at Milu, I mean, you can imagine maybe you're not a clinical tool, but all of the information that you are garnering, in many ways, you're like reverse engineering the rules of the system, like after the fact, right? And you're the ones who are identifying things that went wrong, such that you're already generating this amazing data set of like, what if you went a little upstream of where we are today, and you were able to influence 1 out of the 10 decisions that was made that ended up, that caused this patient to end up in this sort of negative state, and how do I chip away at just shifting left over time? And I mean, this relates to what we were doing at Kairos. Like, we found that if you were to provide availability information, like schedule data, to the referring doctor, how much that would influence different decisions being made, like, remarkable, and not surprising when you say it that way. But the fact that today they don't have that information and therefore completely go based on anecdote or who their buddies are or who they know will give them better customer service, not having any idea about whether their patient can actually get an appointment within a reasonable time that will not have a negative impact on their clinical experience. Same thing with all the information you guys are garnering, right? Like imagine if the referring doctor knew that the financial consequences of sending this patient to this lab versus that lab, where, there was a huge delta there, like that will change behavior upstream such that it just removes, it's almost like one of these like disrupt yourself things, right? Where hopefully one day, like the current product of Milu doesn't have to exist, and you find like sort of higher order ways upstream to actually derive that value.
100%. And like it will get into more clinical and more treatment. Like we're already seeing use cases there. I mean, number one is I was looking at a radiology report for a family member recently. I couldn't understand it. I can understand it as someone who can read stuff, but I'd have to Google. You run ChatGPT on that, it explains it pretty well for you. Like that's a use case that everybody should have when they look at their record. Another one is we see a ton of data on people. We see when 3 different doctors have prescribed drugs that might conflict with each other because the doctors are at different systems and don't see the same stuff. Or if a patient, has a bunch of stuff prescribed that they really need, but they're not picking it up for cost reasons, for convenience reasons, whatever it is. So I think there is a lot that we could do there. I don't know if it's AI today in our world or in the future, but there's a ton of opportunity. Well, Julie, thank you. This has been amazing. Appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. And really always enjoy these conversations about how much amazing work is being done, but then also how much work is left to be done. And it's great that amazing entrepreneurs like you and Gotham are out there doing this.
Thanks for listening to Healthy Savings by Milu Health. If you would like more information about any of the topics you have heard today, we would love for you to get in contact with us. Find us on the web at miluhealth.com.